formulas?
There is, I think there's one math problem that has actual math. The big thing when it comes to formulas is like a intellectual knowledge, if you will, of the relationships that are involved there. So, when we're going to talk in, chapters 1 and 2 about things like CFM versus FPM versus different types of velocities, things like that. You want to know the formulas, and more importantly than the formulas, you want to know what they're trying to get at. But again, I think there's only one math problem. In fact, I know there is. Okay. So I am gonna start here in the book, and I will just point out what my one of my Penn State engineering professors told me. If the professor says it, it's probably worth writing down mostly. If the professor says it twice, it means it's probably on the exam. I don't exactly follow those rules, but if I keep talking about something, you should probably put a star next to it and then go back and understand it. And if I gloss over something, it means you probably don't have to worry about it. That said, one of the really big things that's a theme with the exam is understanding definitions. And there are a lot of tricky terms that are in the filter industry. And you want to make sure that you basically have a sense of being able to compare and contrast, know the difference between some of the tricky terms. So, sorry. Okay. Chapter 1. So, what are we talking about here? We're talking about why we filter air. Just some basics here. Um, you want to be able to know why we're filtering the air. I have a star and on the last paragraph there. Um, we're trying to get contaminants out of the air that we breathe, and it's worthwhile to note that those contaminants can be a couple of different things. They can be solid particulate, they can be aerosolized, they can be gaseous, any number of things. Um, So you want to know a lot about particle size, because when it comes to particle size, that's one of the number one ways that we're going to go about selecting the right filtration system for a given application, right? So we're going to be talking about how big the particles are and what they are, and that's going to have a lot to do with what products we're choosing. You're going to want to know how big a micron is, and you want to know how different size particles operate in the air. So, on page 1, 2, um, that definitely is good information. Now, there's also a number of things that I'm going to highlight within the book that are, frankly, just really good to know. I guess what I should pause here again, and I'm going to ask people to raise their hands. If you are brand new in the air filtration industry, let's go with 1 year or less. Can you please raise your hand on the Zoom? Or drop in the chat how about let's do that. Let's drop in the chat how many years you've been in the air filtration industry. Okay, 3, less than a year, less than a year, less than a year. Okay. So again, this is a great book. Keep it on your desk. You're gonna be if you know how to use it, you're gonna be able to use it regardless of what you are doing in the industry. It's gonna be useful for you. So that said, when I look at the particle size chart on 1.4, do you have to memorize anything on that for the actual exam? No, but it's definitely something to keep in mind. Okay. So I'm skipping ahead to page 1.7. We're going to talk about systems. So there's a bunch of different types of HVAC systems that we could be dealing with. You want to know the differences. There are a bunch of different airs, outdoor, supply, makeup, things like this. You want to know what those are. So, supply is coming in, exhaust is going out, makeup is making up. But you do want to make sure that you get those memorized. And then you want to know on 1/8 the difference between blow through and a draw through system. Okay. Um, page addendum 111 is the Wells Riley. This is a really interesting um, topic in the filtration industry, and I believe there is probably at least a question on the exam about it. Um, oh, one point that I should let people know is that we do have a larger test bank. The test itself is 100 questions, um, but there is a larger bank of questions that you will that will be selected from. So not everyone will have the exact same exam. I believe, at least that's the plan. And one other thing that I would point out is that there is something I believe online that is some sort of study material that is like flashcards or something, not through NAFA, and I've that's got nothing to do with us. Somebody um, put that up a number of years ago, and we've had a lot of people think that that was good and then fail. So be wary of that. That said, the big point with the Wells Riley is to understand that in COVID we really focused a lot on MERV 13. Why? Because it's the biggest bang for the buck. It's the lowest hurdle to change to put a MERV 11 or a MERV 13 filter into a system. You could usually get those in a 2 inch, and you're going to get a lot of um, decrease decrease in your relative risk for a relatively low cost. Whereas if you could spend a lot of money to get a HEPA filter, and it's definitely going to be better than a MERV 13, but the when you do the cost benefit analysis, oftentimes you're not going to see that. At least in generalized application. There are certain applications where you absolutely need a HEPA, no two ways about it. So, on any questions on chapter one? All right. I'm hoping that we're gonna stir up some more questions because this is starting to feel pretty voidy, folks. All right, chapter two. This is your velocity conversation. So it's important to note that it's always going to be positive. If you come across an electrostatic pressure that has negative velocity, that means that your probes are in backwards. Okay, so there are the main types of mechanical air filtration, the impingement, interception, diffusion, and straining. I would point out, each of those. You want to know not only what they are, but you want to know how they actually are working on the particles, and you want to be able to identify how they are affected by the speed of the air, which should be, I think that's coming up in a little bit here. Oh, very good. That's on the top of the next page. So there's a very nice diagram that shows as the velocity increases, your impingement becomes much more effective. Diffusion goes down. Interception basically stays the same. So that's what we're talking about there. Just a note for you, about 70% of the mechanical filtration that takes place is actually done through diffusion on those smallest of particles. because if you look at a sample of air, you're going to have thousands and thousands of particles in that air. The vast majority of them are going to be of the smallest kind. So those are going to be the ones that are captured via diffusion. Um, Whereas when people think of filtration, they're thinking about straining. If it, just in general, if you think about, I'm going to use a lot of examples, but like a screen door or a sewer grate or something like that, right? Where something actually gets caught, the leaves get caught in the sewer grate, right? Like that's what people think of when they think about a filter. That's straining. But really, it's only the particles that are big enough to be lodged between those fibers. So that's like 1% of the particles. You want to know about adhesives and tackifiers, where we use them, why we use them, where on the filter, things like that. Um, you want to know about dipole moments. So we're going to be talking a lot about electrostatic filters and precipitators and all kinds of things electrostatic. And the main fundamental principle that just about all of them work on is the dipole moment. So you want to understand, go back to physics class and make sure you have your dipole moment. So the next thing we're going to be talking about is, kind of the type of things that you're looking for when it comes to what makes filters different, right? So obviously the way that they go about filtering is a question. But then on page 27, we're talking about efficiency, we're talking about pressure drop, we're talking about capacity. These are all fundamentals. You want to make sure that you understand how they play in, because those are the questions that you're going to be asking the customer when it comes to selecting the correct equipment for them. And that's all we're gonna talk about right now for chapter 2. Anything non okay. Um got a question about non-thermal plasma technology. Um Short answer, no. We're gonna talk about bipolar ionization, we're gonna talk about electrostatic precipitators, we're gonna talk about um UV. Um, I wouldn't worry too much about anything plasma. Appendix J, we are going to talk about. So now we are into chapter 3, which is going to start down the road of filters. So basically, we're going to be breaking out the filters in kind of what I refer to as an HVAC style or ASHRAE style versus a high purity or HEPA style. So that said, the first type is going to be an impingement filter. You want to memorize the definition with respect to media velocities and pressure drop and all of that. I really look at an impingement filter as like a panel filter where the velocity of the face velocity and the media velocity are going to be the same. So basically, if you go back to the original foundations of air filtration, um, there was a guy by the name of Bill Reed who was a mechanic and painted cars in the 20s. And he was really sick of dust coming in his window and getting on his cars. So he put a piece of media in his window, and that was kind of the first style of filter. It's just a flat piece of media. That said, at a certain point, we're going to find that there are, pluses and minuses to that. They're going to get filled up pretty quickly. You're going to need to change them more often. It's not going to be able to support as much airflow. So we're going to talk about different ways that you can change the filter technology to accommodate for those different issues. So that's a panel filter. You want to know about graduated density filters. That's on 3.2. And it's interesting that we talk about that in the terms of metal filters here, but the truth is that graduated density filters, where the basically the size holes, for lack of a better term, is different in the front of the filter and the back of the filter, right? So we're going to be knocking out the bigger stuff um, at the beginning of the filter, and then we have kind of like a built-in pre-filter there, and then the smaller particles we capture on the back end, and then if you're using a tackifier or an adhesive, then you'll get that on the very back end and make sure it sticks. Um, that said, there are pleated filters that have dual density media. Sometimes it's uh, dual denier or a lot of other different terms that you'll see about it. Okay. You're going to see it in pleats, bags, boxes, you name it. Da, da. Next page, like I said, shows a good visual of that, and then talks about tackifiers as well. So once you're dealing with strips of media, you need a place to put them. You need a way to hold them in the window or the airstream or whatever it may be. So that's where we start to talk about different ways that you can do that. You can have a removable frame where you're just going to stick that pad in. You can have a ring panel or a link panel where you're actually going to sew the media around a wire ring. And then if you sew a few of those rings together, you're going to have a link. Okay. So now we're going to talk. Any questions on chapter 3? Not all at once. Raise your hand if you're still listening.
How much will we need to know on the test in regards to different pressure drops and such like that for different filters?
I mean, you don't need to memorize the numbers, but you for sure need to know different types of filters are defined by high pressure drop, low pressure drop. Um, you're going to want to use different types of filters in scenarios where you need a lower pressure drop usually. So that's the kind of stuff that you need to know.
Okay,
Question.
more so around the application rather than the actual.
Rather than the actual. Yes and no. You want to, like, as an example, like I said, the impingement filter, that talks about a high media velocity and a low pressure drop, right? So you want to know that impingement filters typically have a low pressure drop, but um, without an application basis, right? So okay, let's see, what do we have here?
Can I ask another
Um,
question?
Go ahead.
So, is there an importance to understand the differences between the types of medias,
Yeah.
fiberglass, media, polyester,
Yep.
polypropylene, etc.?
Well, yes, you want to understand the different types of media, but I think the biggest piece is that you're going to want to know a mechanically a media that really utilizes mechanical filtration versus a synthetic media that deals with electrostatic filtration. So,
Gotcha.
and we'll get a little bit more into that in a bit. There's a question about tackifiers that is going to be found on page 3.3. Questions on the different styles of impingement filters. Yeah, you want to know what an impingement filter is. You want to know what a ring is. You want to know what a link is. You want to know the difference between them. That kind of a thing. Okay. One other thing is that there are some questions on the test regarding grease in kitchen filters. So you can see the last page of chapter 3 talks about grease, and then it talks more about it in chapter 9. So I would just put a star there as well. Extended surface filters. So if you want to have a even lower, if you want to have a better capacity, then you need to cram more media into the space. That way you can capture more particulate before it fills up, right? And along with that, you're going to, the more you capture, the higher the pressure drop is going to go. So in order to have a lower pressure drop, you need to cram even more media into the panel, into the opening, if you will. And so that's where we get extended surface filters. So you're going to want to see again the definition, you know, I will read it for you. Those filters which the filter media area is greater than the face area, or to phrase another way, filters in which media velocity is less than the face area. Okay? If you don't understand that statement, ask about it now, because I will say it in English.
Can you, yeah, can you go over that one more time for me?
Yeah. So it's all about the speed at which the air is moving. So if you are talking about one sheet of media, you have a 2x2 square of media, and you have a 2x2 opening, then the air is going to be flowing through the opening and through the media at the same speed. But if you have a whole bunch more media, um, that is crammed into the same opening, you're going to have more space for the air to be moving, which allows it to slow down a little bit. So it's still moving through it's a very kind of difficult concept to grasp, which is why I pointed out, but it's still going to be moving through the 2x2 square and at the same rate, but it's going to be moving through the media at a different rate. So what it really comes down to is how much media do you have, in square footage. We're going to talk about pleats that, could have 17 or 30 feet, square feet of media in a 4x4 square, right? So if you are moving through 30 feet, it's going to take longer. You're going to be moving slower than if you're going through 4 feet. That makes sense? Okay, so that said, if you take just let's say, if you're talking about a 2x2, now let's talk about a 2x4, and you take that much more media and you want to put it in the same space. How do you do it? You crunch it together and you cram it in. That's essentially a pleat. Okay, so pleated filters are going to be found typically in 1, 2, and 4 inches. Um, and that's what most people think of when they think of a filter, is a pleated filter. Some have metal on the back, some don't. Most of them are synthetic. Some of the more premium ones do have exclusively mechanical filtration. So no problem. If you, great, we've now doubled our media, we've put it into a pleat. But what if I want more media? What if, and even better media, especially as you get into, the higher efficiencies, you're trying to get smaller particles, you're going to be putting more material in the airstream. So you are going to be looking at something that's going to create a lot more pressure drop. So to fight that, we need to cram even more media. So why do we stop pleats at 4 inches? I mean, sometimes they go to 5 or whatever, but mostly we stop pleats at 4 inches. Why? Well, a lot of reasons, but basically, if you want a deeper pleat than 4 inches, essentially, you can bring it all the way out to 12 inches, and that's basically where you change its name to a pocket, and now you're dealing with a pocket or a bag filter. So if you look at, there's a really good picture of that on page 44. And so that's kind of you can see how it's in some way similar to a pleat, except for, it's longer. Your bag filters are going to be um, typically in between 12 and 30 inches long. And because of that, you can't have as many pleats. A pleated filter might have 17 pleats in it. The most you're going to see in a bag filter is typically going to be like 10 pockets. And that's just because of the size of them and kind of what's happening. So what is happening? Well, they start off flat, and then as air goes through, they basically inflate like a big balloon. So there are a lot of questions about bags and where they're good and where they're bad, but the punchline is, excuse me, punchline is you want to use a bag where you're going to have a decent amount of airflow um, and consistent airflow. If you have a system that does not have a whole lot of airflow, then it's going to be constantly inflating and deflating. That's not going to be nearly as good. In an ideal world, back in the 70s, before there was everything had a variable speed drive on it, you had older systems that just cranked on and ran 24/7 and at one speed. That was perfect for a bag. um, Nowadays, the best place to use a bag, in my personal opinion, is on a roof or through a place that has difficult access, where it's a pain to get a box out there. So that said, if you want to cram even more media into the same space, um, you need a little bit more structure to it. So, on the bottom of 4.4, it shows the beginnings of box filters. So that's where you're typically going to see a box filter that's really only in 12-inch depth. Sometimes we'll see it in 6 or something like that. But that's where you're going to be cramming a lot more pleats, so to speak, into the box. And the tricky part there is that we typically will need some way to keep them separate and keep the air openings open, so to speak. So that is where you are going to get into typically either a plastic or a corrugated aluminum separator. Um, you can see a good application on page 4.5 talks about, this box has the advantage of easy installation, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, last piece here is a mini pleat. So a mini pleat is kind of the best of both worlds, where you can cram even more media into a very, very small area. And you for sure going to need different types of separators, whether that's based on, a glue bead or a strip of the media itself, or whether that is um, an embossment in the media. So that said, you're going to have lower pressure drop and really good service life. Now, if you take a bunch of those mini pleated filters and you cram them in to the same space, kind of butting them up against each other, that's where you end up with a V-bank filter, essentially. And so the V-bank is kind of the tank, the be-all and end-all of filtration technology as it is today. You're going to have the longest service life. You're going to have the highest capacity. You're going to have the lowest pressure drop per capacity. It's really a great overall filter. Just about every major manufacturer makes one. And that said, they typically do run more expensive, but you kind of get what you pay for there. Questions on all that?
I have a question.
Go right ahead.
Just on page 4.2, are we expected to know the different colors and efficiencies of the media regarding the lofted microglass media? That little chart there?
Let me think. 4.2 here. No, short answer, no. But now that I look at it, I wonder if I should add a question about it. Probably not.
Okay. Thanks.
Although maybe Kim, for you, I expect you to know it. For everybody
All
else,
right.
you don't need it for the test.
Sounds great.
Yeah. Anybody else? This chapter is the bread and butter of most of your filtration careers. So this is the spot to know and to ask questions. Leland, I see that your hands up. I don't know if that's a actual question or not.
If Leland doesn't have a question, I have another question.
Yeah.
You were talking about media velocity and face value, and you said if you don't know this, KJ asked you to repeat it, but then you went into the definition. But can you say that one sentence again?
I think I was talking about the media velocity over by extended surface filters on 4.1. Media velocity is the speed at which the air moves through the media. And so the very first sentence on the page, extended surface filters are those filters in which the filter media is greater than the face area. Or to phrase it a different way, filters in which media velocity is less than the face velocity.
Thank you.
Disadvantages. Go ahead.
Are there any, I'm sorry, are there any questions on the test where we'll have to, and I know you said there was only one math question, but where we'll have to actually figure out the area of the media?
Yeah, that's you want to be able to go from FPM to CFM and things like that, and that's gonna have to do with the area of the face velocity or the face area.
Thanks.
Yep. Disadvantages of bag filters. Well, it depends on the bag filter, but I think generally speaking, what you're looking at is a situation where on the smaller scale, on the smaller end of bag filters, your 12-inch bag filters and whatnot, you're going to get better performance out of a 12-inch box filter because you're going to have more structural stability. You're going to have a better, typically a better media. You're going to have more media that you can fit into that spot if you're going with a box filter. On the 12, 15 side of things, your dust holding capacity is going to be much better in a premium 12-inch box filter than it will in a 12-inch bag. That said, on a 30-inch bag, okay, so now we're really competing, but now you've had to give, essentially 3 times as much space to your footprint of your air handler, and the air handler is going to, especially nowadays, the engineers and HVAC selectors tend to prioritize lowering footprint. So you just don't really have as much room as you used to. Okay, let's talk chapter 5. Yet again, definitions. You do want to know that the standard definition of a HEPA filter is going to be 99.97% efficiency at 0.3 micron, and that was originally based on what's called DOP, which you can memorize the actual chemical name for extra credit, but nobody uses it. It's just DOP. And we're going to talk about hot or cold DOP later, but that is from Military Standard 282, and that is a fun fact that you're going to want to remember. So HEPAs and ULPAs and super ULPAs, really it's all the same. It's above an ASHRAE MERV 16, right? And I shouldn't say that they're all the same, because they do get very fractionally different. But when it comes to the fundamentals, it's all the same. There are a couple of different types of media to choose from. You're going to be looking at your different separator options, and then you're going to be looking at how those filters solve your problems, right? The fundamentals are still the same. That said, there are a couple of fundamental differences here. So one thing that we're going to talk about is the fact that, you know, just about any manufacturer worth their salt is going to be individually testing HEPA filters. We're going to talk more about testing in a bit. But that's where in the ASHRAE world, or in the HVAC general filtration world, you have what's called a destructive test, where not every a filter is basically rated based on their design. You know, you have a couple of samples and you can test those, but not every filter is actually going to be physically tested. That said, on the HEPA side of things, they're going to be individually tested, which means we can't destroy them. So that's one thing. Another really big thing is that you can have the best filter in the world, but if you don't have it installed properly and utilize the correct equipment, then you are simply not going to have HEPA efficiency. You absolutely must have a perfectly airtight seal, which you can accomplish in a couple of different ways that we'll talk about in a second. So, like I said, just like with the ASHRAE style filters, you're dealing with corrugated aluminum. That's going to be your most typical separator. Sometimes, and you're going to have a mini pleat style as well. So you're going to see your box style HEPAs typically in an air handler, you know, oftentimes in a hospital, final stage of filtration, something like that. And then in addition, you're going to have what's called a terminal unit, and that could be you know, a fan filter unit, or just a hood unit, or any number of things. And that's going to be what's, you know, in the ceiling of your clean room, right above your head, right next to the light. That's going to be a terminal unit. And what's going to be in those are typically going to be mini pleated HEPA filters. Okay. So like I said, the big differences here are going to be that you are going to need either a gasket or a gel seal of sorts. So it's also important to note that just having a gasket doesn't do it for you. You also need to make sure that the gasket's properly compressed. So that page 5.7 talks about compressing your gaskets. That is worth noting. Bag in, bag out filters units are one of the main places that you're going to see those box style HEPA filters, and that is a whole other section that I could give hours and hours of class on. But we have the NCT2 program that focuses a lot on bag in, bag out, so I would recommend taking a look at that. And as far as ULPA or super ULPA, everything that I just said stays the same, except for the very specific amount of nines that you're dealing with. So, you know, again, we're starting with a 99.97. Sometimes you're dealing with a 99.99. That's slightly better. Or sometimes you're dealing with, you know, in the super ULPA, the, you know, 4 or 5 nines. So, questions on HEPA filters? Test open book. No.
Question on.
Go ahead.
Yeah, a quick question on like figure 5.5, page 5.6. Do we need to know the corresponding numbers associated with each of the filter types?
Let me take a look at this.
All the efficiencies?
Yeah, short answer, no. Not for the test. Longer answer, again, this is one of those things where this is a great chart that you can double back for. But what the thing that I have highlighted here on that chart is letter B.
Okay, thank
Good
you.
question. Yep. Josh, you had a question?
So I guess in general, it's more about the media in the HEPA that's actually doing the filtration, and not necessarily the construction of the HEPA that's doing the filtration. Is that kind of a general accurate statement?
Yeah, I think it's all of the above. I think that the same could be said for an ASHRAE filter, right? Like it's the media that does the filtration. In fact, if you look at the definition of media, like that's what it is. It's the thing that does the filtration. That said, if you don't have a proper construction around your media, then you're not going to get your performance. So
Right.
that's the relationship. The media is what does it, but if you don't have there's a section in this chapter about sealing, right? And what that means is you need the sealing properly between the media pack and then the frame, the filter housing itself, and then you also need the proper sealing between the filter housing, or I should say the filter frame and the filter housing that it's actually going into. And if you don't have all of those complete, then the media can't do what it's going to do. Why? Because the air follows the path of least resistance. So there is a tremendous amount of resistance going over these, nanofiber HEPA filters. So therefore, if you have a little gap around the edge, air is going to flow through there instead.
And that's similar to the pinhole leak testing.
Yeah.
Later on. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, where are we at? Thoughts on V-Bank style HEPA filters? So many of them. I have so many thoughts. They are very interesting. They're very good if used properly. They're not as oftenly used properly as I would like to see. And the biggest issue that you run into there is that they're extremely hard to test. So that said, it's application dependent, but if you need a super high volume of HEPA filtered or slightly under HEPA filtered air, then that's definitely a good way to go. Chapter 6 is air cleaners, residential and commercial. This is a chapter that very few people in the industry spend a lot of time on. However, a couple of companies, this is their bread and butter. The big thing in this chapter, and there are several questions, and they can be a little tricky. You need to know the different types of equipment that are discussed in this chapter and know the difference between them. So, what am I talking about? Portable units. You want to know that they're, convenient because they can be moved around, as opposed to induct units can't. And therefore they're really great, kind of a set it and forget it application. But if you need to service them regularly, that can be tricky. Electrostatic precipitators. This is one of those situations where it can be used very well and it often is not. So if you're going to be involved in that type of technology, make sure you help your customers to use them correctly. This is essentially where you're going to be using ions or some other type of technology to give a slight charge to the filters that are to the particulate that's floating around in the air. If you give a speck of dirt a charge, it might then attract itself to a different speck of dirt with a different charge. And then two very small specks of dirt become one slightly larger speck of dirt. And if that happens, then it can be easier to pluck out of the air with a filter. That said, which is great. That said, couple of downsides. If you make it easier to capture, so you're going to capture more. So you're going to have to change the filters more. Or, in these cases where it's, never change kind of equipment, so you're going to need to service it more, empty the trays or whatever it may be. And that's all assuming that the dust actually gets back through the return and into your unit, as opposed to just finding a home in the duct or on the floor or on the table. Okay. Self-contained ESP, you want to see, possible advantages on 6.3, ability to renew the collecting cell by washing it. That's great. Can be problematic though. Hybrid types, I would read basically that section, and just know kind of the ins and outs, what they're good for, what they're not good for. The one thing that I will point out is when it comes to all this stuff, it's not tested the same way, it's not governed the same way. So, if it's something that's going to be in your house, then it's going to be monitored by AHAM, the Association for Home Appliance Manufacturers. They cannot test these types of equipment in the same way as we would test normal filter. And it explains why on the bottom of 6.3, basically the test dust that we use includes something called carbon black, and that will short out the electronics. So they have completely different testing standards. I have a note here at the bottom of 6.4, electronic air cleaner efficiency is inversely proportional to the velocity through the collector system. And to some extent, that's true just for all filters. The slower the air is moving, in a lot of cases, the slower the air is moving, the easier it is to do something with that air. I misspoke earlier. When I was talking about electrostatic precipitators, what I meant to be talking about was the agglomerator units that's at the back of the chapter there. Everything that I said previously associated with the agglomerator units. By electrostatic precipitation, what we're doing is talking about electrostatic media for a second. So if you are looking at a synthetic media, something that happens just naturally by pulling of fibers is it creates a static charge. This is the same static charge as the static electricity you've known since you were a kid. You can, rub a balloon on your shirt and then get your hair to lift up. So that's the static electricity. Now, over time, that dissipates. Just like the balloon doesn't stay stuck to your head forever. That said, what electrostatic media does is that extra charge does dissipate over time, makes it a little less sticky, and the particles don't stick to it and each other quite as well, and so therefore your performance can degrade over time. What the electronic air cleaner electrostatic precipitator can do is use electricity to add that artificial charge and keep those plates charged, so that doesn't happen. So that's the big thing about the ESP. And the difference between the regular and the self-contained is whether the power source is built into it or not. Questions on that? Okay. We're going to keep it rolling for a minute. HVAC filter testing basically boils down to ASHRAE standard 52.2. That is the number one thing that you need to know about. And there are other international standards that you should be familiar with and that you can kind of go back and forth between. There's an excellent chart on 7.5 and 7.6 that are super helpful just in your general careers. But the punchline is like this. If you go to the let's see. If you go to 7.6, you can see kind of how the ASHRAE standard compares to the ISO standard, which compares to the obsolete EN 779 standard. But occasionally, even though it's obsolete, you will still get questions about it from time to time. You will also still get questions about the obsolete ASHRAE standards. That is one of my favorites, when somebody will come and ask for an 85% filter. Okay, so at a certain point you learn what they mean. But the real answer is 85% of what? Because that doesn't mean anything anymore. So that's a reference to an older standard. So MERV is minimum efficiency reporting value. That is how ASHRAE measures air filters. It's on a scale from 1 to 16. Mostly everybody starts paying attention at about 7 or 8 and goes mostly to 15 with a drop of 16 in there. That said, the way that they do this test is they have a very specific test dust that they feed into kind of an auto feeder, and they collect particulate measurements. They see what they get on the filter versus what goes through, and they look at 12 individual filter sizes, and then they collect those 12 individual filter sizes into ranges, range 1, 2, and 3, E1, E2, E3. And then you get ranked on your performance within each one of these categories. And then the worst category is your minimum efficiency, and that is what dictates your overall MERV rating. Any questions on that while I'm taking a drink? Raise your hand if you've ever heard of MERV before.
Of course, come on.
I don't know how. I mean, there are a couple of people that are 3 months in. I don't know what else they've been doing. Okay, that's the best one that I got so far. Okay. So
You initially mentioned that we need to know about the different types of testing. Is this a section
this
that
is
you-
everything that I just said you should know.
Okay.
Basically, the gist of how that test, is calculated and how it works and whatnot. Just a reminder again, room air cleaners do not deal with this type of testing. They deal with something else through AHAM. The other type of testing that you're going to want to really be able to focus on is UL, something that's very prevalent in the United States. Can be a little bit confusing because there used to be something called UL Class 1 and UL Class 2. There is no longer. Now either something is UL certified or it's not. And that's UL 900. Addendum 7.1 gives much more detail to the test. The 52.2 test, you do not need to focus on that for the exam, although it's very useful. Same with Addendum 7.2 describing the ISO test. Okay, on to Chapter 8. We're going to be talking about HEPA and ULPA filter testing. This is different. Like I said, those are going to be destructive tests. So the number one thing that we're looking at here is that there are two different types of tests. There's the test that happens in the factory, and then there's the test that happens after the thing is installed into the building. So On the bottom of 8.1, that's where you have your DOP, diethyl hexyl phthalate, or dioxy. Where is it? Here. The DEHP is what I just said. Oh yeah, there, dioctyl phthalate. So the DOP is the original test that was used for the military standard 282. But that said, turns out it gives you cancer. So they went to other oily aerosols. So that's why we're talking about now it's typically PAO is the one that we're looking at here. So all of that is to say that's fun Jeopardy knowledge for you. But the punchline is the difference between hot and cold. So when you're in the factory, you want what's called a hot DOP test. The reason that it's hot is that that's how we're controlling the size of the aerosol. So we're making sure that it's giving you the proper size of MPPS, most penetrating particle size, because that's what we're testing for, right? So we want to be able to control the particle size. That said, by the time you are in the field and you're doing particle scanning, over the face of the filter, it does not need to be so controlled, because if there is a leak in the field, it will be big enough that it doesn't matter what size of particles coming through it. It will alert you to the fact that there's a leak, and you can either repair or replace the filter. Basically, everything that I just said can be found on pages to 8.3, 8.2, etc. Okay. Da, da, da. Okay. The other thing that you want to know about HEPA testing is UL 586. I would just kind of read that paragraph. The punchline is that's another standard that you might see in addition to your normal HEPA filtration testing. And that is basically going to show that after a HEPA filter is exposed to heat, fire, flame, smoke, etc., that it maintains its HEPA efficiency, and that it's not going to cause other problems. It's particularly important in nuclear applications. Questions on filter testing, chapters 7, 8? All right. Moving right along. Controlled environments. Let's talk about when we are using these HEPA filters after all. There's a question about how many questions there will be regarding testing. I would say some. That's what I'll give you. I think that more than the testing is the types of filters and the applications of the filters. Those are the things that make you a filtration specialist. Frankly, when it comes to filter testing, that is best left to the research and development, the product specialists, the manufacturers, and the test labs. When it comes to helping people on the ground, you need to know how to apply those test results. So where are we using HEPA filters? We're typically going to be using them in clean rooms. Bunch of different clean room types. 9.2 defines a clean room. I would look at that. So bottom of 9.2 on a 9.3, we're going to be talking about one of my biggest pet peeves, which is the word laminar. In this space, there's something called laminar flow, or laminar flow units. That is a misnomer, because laminar flow is in fluid dynamics really just like a theoretical concept. And so what we're really talking about is unidirectional. But that said, for branding reasons, people go with laminar flow units sometimes. They are the same. So unidirectional is there's a good example of that in one of these pictures over here somewhere. If anybody finds it, please shout it out. But if here we go. 9.3. But versus a standard where you don't have unidirectional flow. Couple of paragraphs on 9.3 that really go into detail on that. Clean room classification. They're classified by their level of cleanliness in ISO classes. So you don't need to memorize the chart on 9.4, but it is a good reference to understand what you're talking about when it comes to clean rooms. Couple of other applications, biosafety cabinets. So that's, basically mini clean rooms, so to speak, within a room, right? That we're used to them in high school science class. Could look like that, could look a lot more advanced than that. But that's where you're going to have somewhat of a filter and a fan in there. You can do controlled experiments. So that is your biosafety cabinets. There's also biosafety labs, which I think we're coming up on. The rest of chapter 9 does a really good job of talking through a bunch of different applications and the best filters for them. I highly recommend also getting acquainted with the NAFA guidelines that goes into much greater detail on these types of applications. That said, if somebody calls you up and they're in the photo industry, you can read the paragraph on 9.7 and have a better understanding of what they are doing. As far as the test is concerned, I think there may be something on textiles, and there's certainly something on gas turbines. So I would take a look at that, and also the commercial kitchen and ventilation information as well. Like I said in the earlier chapter, the punchline there is that those are things that most people in NAFA don't touch, the commercial kitchen stuff, but it is under its own category because the National Fire Prevention Association monitors all of that through Code 96. Okay. Questions on any of that? We're going to follow that up with kind of the other half of that is chapter 10, going back to bio class. When it comes especially to HEPAs, we are ultimately trying to get out microorganisms. So we're talking about viruses, bacteria, fungi, however you would like to pronounce it. Doesn't matter for the test. The big things here is that you need to know those three. You need to know their comparative sizes, and you need to know how they grow. So they all have a colony forming unit, and viruses replicate with a host, and bacteria uses cell division, and fungi uses spores. So the rest of this chapter, yet again, is a lot of really good information about specialized applications. Here we are with the biosafety cabinets again. And healthcare. Healthcare, it's worth noting, that's another standard. ASHRAE standard 271, as of 2021, does an excellent job of laying out exactly where in each, what type of filtration you need in each individual type of healthcare facility. But we are going to dive a little bit deeper into airborne infection, isolation, tuberculosis control rooms. So this ties into the questions of positive and negative pressure units and positively and negatively pressurizing a room. So raise your hand if you feel comfortable with the concept of positive versus negative pressure and when you ought to use them. Okay. Now, who's brave enough to actually try to explain it?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm probably completely wrong, but basically, if it's contaminants that are airborne, you want negative pressure. And then if you have the external, like if you're have contaminants that can be in the external to the room, you want positive pressure.
You're definitely on the right track. So, good job. A couple of things here. When you're talking about airborne isolation, you're talking about two different types. You're talking about, are we really worried about the person in the room getting more sick, or are we really worried about the person in the room getting everybody else outside of the room sick? That's the question. So if you are, severely immunocompromised, then we are worried about any, talking about, cancer patients, things like that. We're worried about, somebody walking down the hallway with a common cold, sneezes, that air gets into your room, and now you have, what's a simple virus for them is very, very dangerous for you. That's where you're immunocompromised and we're trying to protect you. Then there's somebody with an extremely contagious, very dangerous disease inside the room, and we're trying to protect everybody else around them from that room. So when it comes to pressurization of a room, my analogy is a clogged sink. So if you have a sink that's operating well, you turn on the faucet and it's draining well, and that's how air is coming in and out of your room. If you have a huge drain and you have a little tiny dribble, then all of the water in your sink's going to go down that drain, no problem. If, however, you have a clogged sink, or you have the or you have a fire hose of a faucet and a normal size drain, you're going to start to build up that water, right? And that's going to create that pressure. So the water pressure in this case, right? But so what are we talking about with air? If you are taking out more air than you are putting in, then there will be a slight vacuum pulled, and that's going to be negatively pressurized, right? So if you are in a tuberculosis room or something like that, you want it to be negatively pressured so that we don't care about you getting more sick by a sneeze in the hallway. Let that come into the room on that vacuum rather than a TB germ leaving the room. Flip side, if you are severely immunocompromised, you want a barrier of air pushing out of all the cracks in that room so that nothing can get in, right? So that's where you want positive pressure, which means you want to be putting more air into the room than you're taking out at any given time. Any questions on that? Next couple of pages, we're back to biosafety cabinets. It's all excellent information, but in the interest of time, I'm going to be moving a little bit more quickly. Okay. On to chapter 11. Now we are talking about chemical stuff. We were in physics, now we're in chemistry. Molecular filtration, it's called a lot of things, called carbon, called gaseous, whatever it may be. What we're dealing with are generally two problems. We're talking about odors and we're talking about corrosives. And those can be caused by any number of different chemicals. Generally speaking, I have on the first page, gaseous compounds with a molecular weight above 300 are generally considered odorless because they're too big for your olfactory receptors. So we're talking about things that are smaller than that. So how do we capture them? The answer is with chemistry. People are used to the term absorb with a B. This is what happens. You absorb something with a sponge. When you are dealing with the chemical process of molecular filtration, you are dealing with adsorption. That is with a D, and it is detailed on page 11.3. On 11.4, it is worth noting that it works better at lower temperatures and humidities. So what does that mean? It means that if you're trying to do something to fix corrosiveness or odor problems in the air, and you're in an extremely hot and humid environment, it's going to be more difficult to succeed, which means you're going to need a larger system of sorts. When it comes to molecular filtration, it's going to be the same thing as what we're about to talk about with UV in a little bit. It's an equation of time and contact. So you need a certain amount of time in order to for those reactions to occur. So there is a there is a formula to figure this out. You don't need it for the test, but you need to understand basically you depending on the airspeed and the contaminant level, you either are going to potentially need a more media in order to decrease the amount of time that's needed, or you need to have several passes of the air in order to clean it properly. Chemisorption is another aspect that is used, and that the difference between chemisorption and adsorption is a physical process versus a truly chemical one. And really what that comes down to is whether or not you can reverse it. So, or I should say whether or not it's worth it to reverse it. So if you're dealing with an activated carbon, something like that, you're just dealing with adsorption, you can recharge that media and kind of let it, you let it refresh and then you can reuse the media. That said, if you're dealing with something that is true chemisorption, you're not going to be, it's a one and done kind of a situation. Catalysis, just like any other chemical reaction, sometimes you can use catalysts to lower the energy, activation energy of the chemical reaction. When it comes to selection in this category, mostly we're dealing with a couple of main things, unless you're very specialized in this area. So you're going to be looking at activated carbon, or you're going to be looking at like a potassium permanganate. And each one of those is going to be really good for its own thing. And your options, if you know what you're trying to filter out, you can make a selection of media that is designed to go after what you're doing. Like, for instance, on 1112, it talks about hydrocarbons. If you're trying to get a hydrocarbon, then activated carbon should do you just fine. But if you're trying to get more acidic gases or something like that, then you might want to go with the potassium permanganate. If you don't know what you're going for, you can go with a mix of medias, but you might just be wasting some. What's the application? Typically, you're going to either see a standard style filter that is kind of laced with that media, and it'll do either a kind of the standard MERV 8 filter, if you will, or MERV 13 or something like that, and then also have the odor component, or you're going to have large amounts of media either in a tray or a canister or something like that. That is about it for that chapter. Questions? um, okay.
Well, we need to know the,
Go ahead.
sorry. We noted that chart on 1110. We need to know the details of what each one of those contaminant, what gets rid of each contaminant.
Nope. Exactly what I said is the extent to which you need to know it. But it's yet again, an excellent resource if you are trying to help a customer. Indoor air quality. Just some highlighting of some basic concepts that you're going to want to know. Difference between sick building syndrome and building related illness. And you're going to want to be able to know a little bit about the other aspects of indoor air quality, which focus on things like humidity and primarily ventilation. Ventilation is a big question that is not exactly related to filtration directly, but you will get a lot of questions about it. And so that is governed by ASHRAE standard 62. There's 62.1 and 62.2. And they talk about a little bit of filtration, but mostly ventilation, air changes, things like that. And the difference there is going to be whether you're dealing with a residential or a commercial. If you're interested in that, ASHRAE has a really good class that you can take online, kind of become an expert in that as well. So 62.1 is going to be focused on that more commercial side of things. 62.2 is going to be more on the residential side of things. You can remember that because 52.2 is what we use for commercial, so it's the opposite. More applications, talking about healthcare on 12.9. That's where you get the information about ASHRAE standard 170. About what you need for there. Owning and operation costs. This is a big deal when it comes to especially premium filters on the market, because typically you're going to have a better total cost of ownership when it comes to more premium filter, but it's going to be a situation where you get what you pay for. So they're more expensive. So we have to explain how and why. So there's a lot of costs that go into filtration, and many of them are seen and many of them are unseen. And there's also a little bit of a trick there in deciding when the when a filter's life should be over. So you want to know, in the intro, it lists the different types of costs: initial, installation, operating, disposal, etc. You want to make sure that you have a concept of all that. And then the other big thing is energy costs. So the punchline here is the longer you leave a filter in, the more dust it will collect. The more dust it collects, the higher the differential pressure drop. The higher the differential pressure drop, the the harder the fan and the motor have to work to move the same amount of air through that resistance. Therefore, the higher the energy bill ultimately will be. So, if you want a filter to have the lowest possible energy cost whatsoever, then you want the lowest possible pressure drop. No problem. Change it every single day. Or better yet, don't have a filter in there at all. If you don't have a filter in there at all, then you won't have any pressure drop, and then you're totally fine. But there's a problem with that. You need filtration. And it does not make any sense to change a filter every day. So on the flip side, if you want the best level of filtration, if you want to let it go as long as possible, so leave the filter in forever, never change it. Well, at a certain point, you're going to have such a high pressure drop that either the filter itself will fail, or you're going to be starving the system of air. So, and because of that, you're going to have energy costs through the roof. So how do we balance it? And the answer is found very well on 13.7. There's a little tiny pressure drop versus time and cost per hour. Yeah. All right. So you can see the one line is going up over at, the energy cost is going up over time because the energy is consumed as the pressure drop goes up. Total inclusive filter costs, i.e. the cost of the purchase of the filter and the installation, the disposal, et cetera, the longer you make it last, the lower that gets per filter. So you add the two lines together and you get the total cost curve, which is at the top, and then you find the lowest point on the total cost curve, and that is the perfect time to change your filter. That said, it's not always the perfect time because nobody's going to change their filter at 3.4 months. They're either going to change it at 3 or 4, whatever it may be. So you have to then use these calculations and work with your customers to figure out what makes the most sense for them. Just a couple of notes about sizing your systems. 13.4 talks about under and overrating the filters, and it basically comes down to this. If you have more filter in the system than you really truly need, that makes the filters work less hard. And if they work less hard, they last longer. If you make them work harder than they're designed to work, they will last shorter. UVGI and photocatalytic oxidation, chapter 14. Like I said, just like everything else that isn't mechanical filtration, it can be great if used correctly. It is a buyer beware, use it correctly situation. Something that is worth knowing, we're dealing with there are a number of different types of UV. We're dealing with UVC, which is 200 to 280 nanometer wavelength. And you're dealing with a equation of time and intensity. So a couple of things, the origins of UV were designed to shine it on your coils and prevent microorganisms from growing. It does a great job at that. It's been proven time and time again to do that. Especially with COVID, there came an effort to use it, what's called kill on the fly. And so if you're going to do that, then you want your lamps oriented parallel to the airstream so that you can maximize your time that you're exposing the pathogen to, and do your best and hope. That said, if you do kill a microorganism with UV, you need to make sure you're still not taking it out of the air. You need to make sure that you are capturing the inactive microorganism with a filter at some point. It's also worth noting that UV lights break down air filters, especially synthetic medias. But that said, it also, even if you're dealing with a mechanical filter like a fiberglass, it's not going to break down the fiberglass, but it might break down the cardboard or the adhesive or something like that. Do not shine your lights directly on your filters. PCO, just a note on the on 14.6, provides significant advantages for mitigation of pollutants associated with poor indoor air quality due to the low pressure drop across the reactor and ambient temperature operation. PCO reactors can be incorporated into existing HVAC systems. So the pros of PCO and the cons are found in the last two paragraphs of 14.7, and I would make sure that you have those down. All right, we are almost done here. Chapter 15, we are looking at industrial contaminant air filtration control systems. What does that mean? Heavy duty, very dirty applications. You know, it's the opposite of a clean room, right? So you need very delicate, very fancy filters when you're dealing with a clean room. You need very robust, heavy duty filters that are very good at what they're doing when you're in an industrial situation. One of the big things you got to worry about is metalworking fluids. They are horrible for humans, and if they weren't so useful, we should never use them, except for the fact that we need to use them because we like things made out of metal, and we need metalworking fluids to cool, lubricate, and clean the parts. That said, inhalation of metalworking fluids pretty much guaranteed to kill you. There's a whole page, 15.3, dedicated to the various ways it can damage you. First paragraph is really what you need to focus on there. So how do we need to combat them? We need systems that are system performance goals on 15.4. We're looking at continuous airflow rates at design. We're looking at continuous high filtration efficiency. We're dealing with low maintenance. These things are typically hung, you know, in the ceilings of forges and places that are very hard to get to. So you want to make sure that they work. I'm going to skip a little bit until we get to 15.8, dust separation. So dust collectors are a big area of this space, and basically they all work with the same four components: pickup points, ductwork, collection equipment itself, and air movers such as a fan. So there are on 15, 9, and 10 a couple of different types of bag houses and dust collectors. You want to be able to identify the differences in the use cases for each. So bag house is going to use the shaker method, and you're going to be more likely to use a cartridge separator when your space constraints are higher. Okay. Last but not least, as far as chapters are concerned, we have the industrial finishing. So spray booths, paint booths, things like that. The really key thing to understand here is that you need pre-filtration and final filtration in many of these applications. So you need pre-filters that are going to protect your work from contaminants in the air. If we're trying to paint something, we want to make sure that that's a very clean environment so that nothing can damage the paint. Obviously, that means particulate. Also, especially means anything oil-based is particularly troublesome for any sort of paint or industrial finishing. So we want to definitely make sure that we are protecting the work from that, and especially because oftentimes you're going to be looking at a place that you're industrially finishing something will be a place where you made it earlier on in the factory with a metalworking fluid that's now got floating in the air. So we have to keep clean spaces clean. And then the other side of it is downside in the exhaust. So we're releasing ridiculous amounts of chemicals into the air. We have all kinds of paints and things that as you can see on 16.2, if you have to dress like that in order to be near the stuff, you don't want to be breathing it. So we need to be able to protect the downstream side as well. On 16.4, it talks about 3 different options in order to have supply air selection. And I would focus on option 2 because that's going to be the biggest bang for your buck. Okay, and then as far as exhaust air and getting paint overspray and things like that, it's another thing that we get a lot of questions on. People ask how to dispose of filters and whatnot when they're covered in nasty stuff, and the answer is that it is entirely that is not a manufacturer thing, that is not a distributor thing, that is a local government thing. Everybody has their own rules and laws and how they're supposed to do it, and I can guarantee you the answer is very different in Texas and California. Okay, so that's basically the gist of all of the chapters. The appendices again are super useful in general, but I wouldn't be overly concerned about them for the test. The one thing that I would really focus on is the glossary, and that is technically chapter 17. This is where you're going to get the cliff notes, spark notes of everything we just talked about. So I will just point out a few of the things that we talked about that you should, really commit those definitions to memory. Absorption versus adsorption. AHAM, the Association of Home Appliance Manufacturers. ASHRAE synthetic test dust. We talked about that. This is where you're going to have a good reference on what exactly makes that up. Chemisorption is in there as well. And then DOP, to the Ds, we want to make sure we know what's going on there. As well as all your basics, capacity, efficiency, pressure drop, dust holding capacity, for sure. FPM, CFM, IAQ, all of your acronyms. It's useful to know. HEPA versus ULPA versus Super ULPA. Media area is the square footage of media that's in that air that's in the opening. Media velocity is the volume flow rate divided by the media area of the filter. So the most common example that we're dealing with here is a standard 24 by 24 by 2 pleated filter. So, that's where you're going to be looking at a 492 feet per minute velocity turns into 2,000 cubic feet per minute as that air volume. Most penetrating particle size, that's what we're testing for with respect to HEPA. PaO, which is the new challenge liquid used to replace DOP. You want to understand penetration versus efficiency, realizing that one is used for HEPA and one is used for ASHRAE. And then understanding your static pressure versus velocity pressure versus total pressure, for sure. So that is not everything you need to know for the exam, but certainly an awful lot of it. We have 9 minutes left. What questions do we have? Okay, if there are none, then I will just type my email in the chat as well. Feel free to hit me up via email or LinkedIn or something like that if you have any other questions. And good luck to everybody.
Do you have another session of this coming?
Few months from now, I think, right? Terry, are you there?
Just thinking, was it just today, or are you going to do like another one this week or anything like that?
No, just this this one for right now. But then there's going to be another one. Let's see if I can. I think it's in a few months.
How many questions you got to get right out of 100?
70, I believe.
It's gonna be a tough one, man.
Like I said, if you read the book and you take notes and you restudy everything that I just talked about, then you're almost guaranteed to pass. And if you don't, you can always retake it. So the next one is going to be it's on the calendar for October 7th. Terry, I don't know if that's on my calendar, so but
All right. Well, I appreciate your time today. That was helpful.
no problem.
All
right.
It's don't trip yourself up, and especially I would say for anybody who's had any real amount of time in the filtration industry, if you've been in 5 years or longer, the number one thing is don't think too hard, because just like any other test, it is designed to be a little tricky, and it can be, you could make the argument that maybe it's kind of like this, but in reality, the test is designed with the book in mind. So whatever it says in the book is what's going to be, the rule on the test, whether or not there are exceptions. So
How is it broken up? Is it multiple choice, true, false?
it is
Right in.
Yeah, no, it's all multiple choice and true false. I believe it's 70 questions are multiple choice and 30 are true false.
Thank you.
Great. All right. Like I said, my email's in the chat, or find me on LinkedIn, and happy to help anybody in the meantime. So with that, we will call it. Have a good one, folks.
Thanks so much,
Thank you.
Hunter.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.